So one of the great battles in World War II on the Western Front is Normandy.
Yeah.
I have to talk to you about Normandy.
Have to talk
D-Day,
about it.
the Normandy landings, the famous on June 6, 1944. This was Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied Western Europe.
Yep.
What was the planning? And it was lengthy planning. What was the planning? What was the execution of the Normandy landings?
Well, the decision to finally go in, when the Americans joined the war in December 1941, there's the Arcadia Conference a few days later, a week later, between the British chiefs of staff and political leaders, Churchill and Roosevelt and his own chiefs of staff, about what the policy should be. And the policy is to get American troops over to Europe as quickly as possible, get them over to Britain, get them training, and get them across the Channel ASAP, and start the liberation of Europe. But the reality is that in 1942, the Americans just aren't ready. They've gone from this incredibly tiny army, they're still growing, they've got no battlefield experience. The British are still recovering. They're good on the naval power. They're kind of increasingly good on air power, but land power they've had to kind of make up from the loss of their ally France and expand as well. So kind of ground zero for both America and Britain has been kind of June 1940, when France is out, and suddenly that's the strategic earthquake, and that's the issue that needs settling, and they need to just completely realign everything that they'd fought in 1939. They've got to start again. But it also becomes clear that they're not really ready in 1943 either. And one of the problems is that Molotov, who is the Soviet foreign minister, has come over to Britain in May 1942 and said, we need you to kind of do your bit and get on the campaign trail against the Germans and fight on the ground. And the British sort of go, well, yeah, but cross-channel invasion is not really going to happen. We know we're doing that in North Africa at the moment. And then he goes over to Washington, and the Americans go, we are definitely going to go and take on the attack to the Germans in 1942. They've made this promise. So in the summer of 1942, it becomes clear that they can't keep that. So Churchill says, well, look, here's an idea. We've already got an army in Egypt. Why don't we land another one in Northwest Europe? Northwest Africa. That's run by Vichy France, which is pro-Axis French colonies. Why don't we take that, and we can do that, and then we can meet in the middle, we can pincer out, we can conquer the whole of North Africa. You can kill with two birds with one stone, because you can get some experience fighting against Axis troops, test some of your equipment and commanders, what's not to like, and then we can sort of see how it goes. So this is a kind of opportunistic strategy, whereas the Americans are very much sort of, we want to draw a straight line to Berlin, and that's the quickest way, and let's do it that way. So it's kind of a different viewpoint. But Roosevelt kind of gets that and agrees to that. So that's where the whole North Africa Mediterranean campaign comes from. And as a consequence of the huge commitment to Tunisia, 3,500 aircraft, huge navies, two Allied armies in North Africa by the time Tunisia is won in mid-May 1943. They think, well, we've got all this here. We might as well kind of really try and put the nail into the coffin of Italy's war, get them out of the battle. Sicily's an obvious one. Let's go in there, and then we can take a view. But between Sicily happening and the fall of North Africa is the Trident Conference in Washington. And that is where the decision is made. The Americans go, okay, enough of this opportunistic stuff. Let's just, okay, we get it, we buy it, but no more faffing around. May 1944, 1 year hence, we are going to cross the Atlantic. And the British go, okay, fair cop, we'll do that. So that is where Operation Overlord, as it gets given its code name, its operational name. That's when the planning starts. Serious planning starts at the beginning of 1944. And one of the lessons from Sicily to Normandy is that you can't have commanders fighting one battle whilst preparing for the next one. So you have to have a separate command structure. And that's okay, because by this time we've got enough people that have got experience of battlefield command that you can actually split it. There are very good reasons for going into Italy, not least getting the Foggia airfields, so that you can further tighten the noose around Nazi Germany. And one of the great prerequisites for the Normandy invasion is total control of of the airspace, not just over Normandy, but over a large swathe of Northwest Europe. Why is that? Because the moment you land in Normandy, the cat is out of the bag, And it's then a race between which side can build up men and material quickest. Is it going to be the Allies who've got to come from southern England, which is a distance of a slow journey across seas and a distance between kind of 80 and 130 miles away? Or is it going to be the Germans that are already on the continent? Well, clearly on paper, it's the Germans. So you have to slow up the Germans. Well, how do you do that? Well, you do that by destroying their means of getting there. So bridges, destroy all the bridges over the Seine, destroy all the bridges over the Loire, hit the marshalling yards. The glue that keeps the German war machine together is the Reichsbahn, the German railway network. So destroy the railway as much as you possibly can and make it difficult for the Germans to reinforce the Normandy bridgehead as and when it comes. But the way you do that in turn is by very low-level precision bombing, and that has to be done by twin-engine, faster, smaller bombers going in low. But the problem is you can't go low and destroy those bridges if you've got Fokker-Wulfs and Messerschmitts hovering above you. So you've got to destroy those, which is why you need to have air superiority over this large swathe of Northwest Europe to do that. The problem is that while the industrial heartland of Nazi Germany is in the west, is in the Ruhr area, which is very convenient for bombers coming out of Lincolnshire or East Anglia on the flat east side of Great Britain. The aircraft industry is much deeper into the Reich, and it is beyond the range of fighter escorts for the bombers. And the American daylight bombers who are going over are discovering that despite being called flying fortresses, they're not fortresses. They're actually getting decimated. And whenever their bombers go in strength over to try and hit the aircraft industry in Germany, beyond fighter range, they get decimated. First, infamously on the Schweinfurt-Regenburg raid on the 17th of August, 1943, coincidentally the same day that Sicily falls to the Allies, and also coincidentally the same day that face-to-face negotiations begin with the Italians for an armistice in Lisbon. But on that day, of the 324 heavy bombers that the Americans send over to hit Schweinfurt and Regensburg, where there are a Messerschmitt plant and also a ball bearing plant, which is essential for aircraft manufacturing, they lose 60 shot down and a further 130 odd really, really badly damaged. And even for the vast numbers of manpower and bombers that are coming out of America, this is too much. So they can't sustain it. So they've got to find a fighter escort that's going to be able to escort them all the way into the Reich. And the race is on, because basically if they haven't got one airspace by April 1944, it's game over. You can't do a cross-channel invasion. You have to have that control of the airspace beforehand. So the race is on. Unfortunately, they come up with a solution, which is the P-51 Mustang, which has originally been commissioned in May 1940 by the British, developed from sketches to reality in 117 days. It's a work of absolute genius, but to start off, it's harnessed with a really bad engine. The Allison engine is just not right for that aircraft. And it's not until a Rolls-Royce Merlin, which is the same one that powers the Lancaster, the Mosquito, and the Spitfire and Hurricane, is put into the P-51 Mustang, that suddenly you've got your solution, because that means it can now fly with extra drop tanks and fuel tanks. It can, it's so aerodynamic and it's so good. The higher it goes with this engine, the more fuel efficient it becomes. It can actually fly, over 1,400 miles, which gets you not just to Berlin and back, but to Warsaw and back. So suddenly you've got that solution. And actually by April 1944, they have cleared airspace. And by the end of May 1944, just on the eve of the invasion, Operation Overlord, the closest German aircraft that is seen fighting Allied aircraft is 500 miles from the beachhead. Wow. So it is absolutely job done. Meanwhile, comparatively new ground attack fighter planes like Typhoons and Tempests and adapted P-47 Thunderbolts are attacking the German radar stations all along the coastline, because they now do have an air defense system. They're destroying kind of 90% of their effectiveness. And in the intelligence game, they're winning that one as well. They're just much better because in Germany, intelligence is power. So people tend to, and Hitler always has this kind of divide and rule thing going on. So you have parallel command structures, which is not conducive to bringing together of intelligence. And while much play has been made about the successes of Bletchley and code breaking and all the rest of it, actually, what you have to do is you have to see the kind of the decrypts that the Bletchley cryptanalysts do as just a cog, and those various cogs together, from listening services to photo reconnaissance to agents on the ground to also the cogs collectively add up to more than the sum of their individual parts. And so the intelligence picture is a broad picture rather than just code breaking. But anyway, they win that particular battle as well. And what you see really with D-Day is the zenith of coalition warfare. What you've got multiple nations who have different overall aims, different cultures, different attitudes, different start points, but they have all coalesced into one common goal. Until they've achieved that common goal, they're going to put differences to one side. Much play has been made about kind of Anglophobia amongst American commanders and Americophobia amongst allied, British commanders. But actually, it's nothing. It's a marriage made in heaven compared to the way Germany looks after its own allies, for example. And what is remarkable about the allies is they're not actually allies; they're coalition partners. So there's no formal alliance at all. And there is a subtle difference there. But what you see them is you see them really, really pulling together. And you see that manifest itself on D-Day, I think, where you've got, 6,939 vessels, of which there are 1,213 warships, 4,127 assault craft, 12,500 aircraft, 155,000 men landed and dropped from the air in 24-hour period. It is phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal. And while it is still seen as a predominantly American show, all three service commanders are British. It is most of the aircraft are. 2/3 of the aircraft are British. 2/3 of the men landed are British and Dominion. You never forget the Canadians, who consistently punch massively above their weight in the Second World War in all aspects, it has to be said, air, land, and sea. They're key in the Battle of the Atlantic. They're key in air power. They're key at D-Day and indeed in the Battle for Italy as well. So the Canadians should never be forgotten. But one of the reasons it is is the British Navy that dominates in D-Day is because, of course, the incredibly enormous strength of the Royal Navy in the first place, but partly because most of the US Navy is by this stage in the Pacific, fighting its own fight. So it's not slacking by any stretch of the imagination. It is because it's elsewhere doing its bit for the kind of overall Allied cause. But D-Day is just extraordinary, and despite the terrible weather, which is such a debilitating factor in the whole thing. I mean, it puts people off course, means many more people get killed on Omaha Beach than they might have done, and on other beaches besides, incidentally. And actually, in terms of lives lost, proportionally, it is the Canadians that suffer the worst, more so than the Americans. It's just there's fewer of them overall. D-Day has to be seen as an unqualified success. I mean, it is absolutely extraordinary what they achieve. And while they don't 100% achieve their overall D-Day objectives, the objectives are always going to be the outer reach of what can be achieved, and you'd need absolutely perfect conditions for that to happen, and they don't get perfect conditions. But they're so balanced, they've so thought of absolutely everything, and their logistics supply, and I mean, even things like the minesweeping operation. It's the biggest single minesweeping operation of the entire war, because there's huge minefields off the Normandy coast, and ahead of the invasion force, the minesweepers, which amount to, I think, something like 242 different minesweepers in 5 different operations opposite every single beach, creating lanes through these minefields through which the invasion force can go. Not a single ship is lost to a mine in the actual invasion. That is phenomenal, and can only be done with the greatest of skill and planning, and all in a period where there are no computers, there's no GPS, there's nothing. I mean, it is absolutely astonishing, and the scale of it is just frankly mind-boggling.
Yeah, and that was really the nail in the coffin, the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
For Hitler, for the European theater.
Yeah. Once you get the only cause for doubt is, will they be able to secure that bridgehead? The moment they get that bridgehead, it is game over. There's only, there is no other way it's going to be, because of the overwhelming amount of men and material that the Allies have compared to the Germans at this stage of the war. And of course, you're being attacked on 3 fronts, because there's the Italian front to the south, and of course, in a very major way, you've also got the Eastern Front. And Operation Bagration, which is launched that summer as well, is enormous.